Texas, 1875. A woman steps down from a dusty wagon into the harsh light of a scorching afternoon. Her gloved hands clutch a well-worn letter bearing a stranger's hopeful promises. Her eyes scan the barren landscape, searching for the man whose portrait she's carried across 1,000 miles of wilderness. The future she traveled so far to claim appears nowhere in sight. Only the blackened remains of what was once a homestead. But destiny rarely follows the paths we imagine for ourselves. What awaits her will test the limits of her resolve and reveal that sometimes our true strength emerges only when all our carefully laid plans turn to ash. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The August sun hung mercilessly over the West Texas plains as the hired wagon from Fort Worth rumbled to a final stop. Catherine Murray pressed a handkerchief to her face, shielding her skin from the relentless dust cloud that seemed determined to coat everything in a layer of grit. 26 years old, with auburn hair and eyes the color of storm clouds, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that masked the uncertainty churning beneath her composed exterior. The journey from Boston had consumed 17 days of constant motion, each mile stretching the thread connecting her to the life she'd known until it finally snapped somewhere around the Mississippi River. What lay before her now bore no resemblance to the lush cattle ranch described in 2 years of careful correspondence. Rawlins Creek, announced the driver, a weathered man named Donovan who had maintained stoic silence for most of their day-long journey from the railway station. "End of the trail for you, miss." Catherine smoothed the wrinkles from her traveling dress, a practical grey cotton that had once seemed sensible in Boston but now felt woefully inadequate for the Texas frontier. The heat pressed against her like a physical presence, making even the simple act of breathing feel like labor. "There must be some mistake," she said, her gaze fixed on the charred remains of what had once been a modest ranch house. The outbuildings, a barn, a small bunkhouse, and what appeared to be a workshop still stood but showed signs of neglect. No smoke rose from any chimney, no animals grazed in the nearby pen, no Nathan Crawford came striding forward to greet his mail-order bride. Donovan spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "No mistake, ma'am. This here's the Crawford place, or what's left of it." Inside her modest carpet bag lay her most precious possessions, a small leather portfolio containing her teaching credentials, $200 in carefully counted banknotes, and a daguerreotype of her parents, both gone now, to consumption. None of the scattered ranch hands working in the distance knew that the unassuming woman standing beside a hired wagon carried enough education to run a schoolhouse and enough determination to cross a continent alone. "Mr. Crawford," she asked the driver, scanning the property for any sign of human habitation, was there an accident?" The word "dead" caught in her throat, unwilling to be voiced. Donovan's leathery face creased in what might have been sympathy. "You might say that, miss. Rangers took him 3 weeks back. Horse theft's a hanging offense in these parts." The world seemed to tilt beneath Catherine's feet. After 15 months of correspondence, she had traveled halfway across the country to marry Nathan Crawford, whose letters had painted a picture of a modest but thriving cattle ranch 20 miles outside of Rawlins Creek. His last letter had explicitly stated he would meet her at this very spot on this very day. "There must be some mistake," she repeated, her voice barely audible over the hot wind rustling through the dry grass. Mr. Crawford's letters spoke of his business, his herd, his plans for expanding the ranch house before winter. Easy to write. "Pretty words," Donovan replied, already loading her trunk onto the hard-packed earth. "Harder to live honest by 'em." Within moments, the driver was climbing back onto his wagon seat, eager to begin the return journey before nightfall consumed the dangerous trail back to town. "Town's that way," he offered, pointing east. "'Bout 20 miles. stage comes through every Thursday if you're aiming to head back east." Catherine watched as the wagon disappeared in a cloud of dust, leaving her standing alone with her trunk and carpet bag in front of the charred skeleton of her intended future. The brutal reality of her situation slowly sank in. She was alone, in a strange territory, with limited funds and no immediate prospects. The man she had come to marry, a man she knew only through carefully penned letters, was apparently a horse thief facing a hangman's noose. A sound from the direction of the barn caught her attention. She turned to see a figure emerging from the shadows, a man with a pronounced limp, perhaps 40 years old, with a face weathered by sun and hardship. His clothes were worn but clean, and he carried himself with the wary posture of someone accustomed to hard work and harder luck. "Ma'am," he called, approaching cautiously. "You lost?" "I'm Catherine Murray," she replied, straightening her spine and summoning what dignity she could. I was to meet Nathan Crawford here today." The man's expression shifted to one of unmistakable pity. "I'm Samuel Abernathy. I was Crawford's foreman." He removed his hat, revealing sun-bleached hair and a deep scar that ran along his temple. "I'm afraid you've had a wasted journey, Miss Murray." "So it seems," Catherine replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "The driver mentioned something about rangers and horse theft." Abernathy nodded grimly. "Crawford was running horses with altered brands. Rangers caught him red-handed driving a herd across the Brazos. He's in the territorial prison awaiting trial, though there ain't much question how that'll end." The brutal frankness of frontier justice struck Catherine like a physical blow. In Boston, there would have been lawyers, character witnesses, perhaps leniency for a first offense. Here, theft, particularly of horses, was a capital crime, with justice delivered swiftly and finally. "And the house?" she asked, gesturing toward the blackened timbers. "Lightning strike 2 weeks back. Nothing to be done by the time we saw the smoke from the north pasture." Catherine took a deep breath, forcing her mind to work practically despite the shock. "Do you still work here, Mr. Abernathy?" "Trying to hold what's left together," he confirmed. "Me and 2 hands. Cattle still need tending, and Crawford's brother, in San Antonio, might want to claim the property once everything's settled. Laws unclear on property rights when the owner's headed for the gallows." The growing darkness amplified the desolation of her circumstances. No husband, no home, no clear path forward or back. "Is there somewhere in town I might find lodging?" she asked, her practical nature asserting itself through the shock. Abernathy studied her for a long moment. "Town's no place for a lady alone. Miss Murray, too many men with too much whiskey and too little sense." He gestured toward the bunkhouse. "The hands are out with the herd tonight. You can take my quarters in the bunkhouse till morning. I'll sleep in the barn. By daylight, we can figure out what's to be done." The offer, though clearly well-intentioned, highlighted the precariousness of her position. A proper Boston lady would never consider accepting such an arrangement, but Boston was 1,000 miles and a lifetime away. "That's very kind, Mr. Abernathy," she said finally. "I would be grateful." As Abernathy carried her trunk to the bunkhouse, Catherine surveyed what remained of Nathan Crawford's ranch. The barn was sturdy, if neglected. The corral held perhaps a dozen horses, likely the legitimate portion of what had once been Crawford's business. The bunkhouse was simple but solid. Water flowed in a small creek just beyond the burned house, explaining the property's original appeal. Despite the devastating fire and its owner's disgrace, the land itself still held promise. Abernathy's quarters proved to be a Spartan but clean room, separated from the main bunkhouse by a simple partition. A narrow bed with worn but freshly laundered linens, a small table, a trunk and a washstand constituted the entirety of the furnishings. A shelf held a few dog-eared books, evidence that the foreman was a man of some education. "It's not much," he apologized, setting her trunk at the foot of the bed, "but it's dry and reasonably clean." "It will serve admirably for tonight," Catherine assured him. I'm grateful for your kindness to a stranger. Abernathy nodded awkwardly. There's stew in the pot on the stove if you're hungry. I'll bring water for washing. Left alone, Catherine sank onto the edge of the bed, finally allowing herself to absorb the magnitude of her situation. The carefully constructed future she had imagined, a respectable marriage, a fresh start in the West, escape from the limited options available to a spinster teacher in Boston, had disintegrated with each revelation about Nathan Crawford. From her carpet bag, she withdrew the packet of letters that had guided her across the continent. 23 letters, each bearing the same strong handwriting. She had believed herself cautious, insisting on corresponding for a full year before. Agreeing to travel west, Crawford's letters had been consistent, detailed, and seemingly sincere. He had described the ranch, the herd, the improvements he was making to the house, even the fruit trees he had planted in anticipation of her arrival. Had it all been fabrication? Or had a once honest man turned to dishonesty when circumstances grew challenging? Would the real Nathan Crawford have been a suitable husband, or had she narrowly escaped, joining her life to a criminal's? A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Abernathy had returned with a bucket of water and a neatly folded towel. "Thought you might want to wash off the trail dust," he said, setting both on the small table. "I'll leave you to your privacy." "Mr. Abernathy," she called as he turned to go. Was Mr. Crawford a good employer?" The foreman paused, considering his words carefully. "He was fair with wages and not harsh with the men," he said finally. "But there was always something not quite settled in him, like a man running from something he couldn't name." He hesitated. "The horse thieving didn't surprise me when it came out. Some men can't resist an easy profit, even when they're doing well enough honest." After he left, Catherine used the cool water to wash away the dust of travel, changing into her nightdress behind the privacy screen in the corner. The simple act of cleansing restored some measure of her composure. As she prepared for sleep, she forced herself to consider her options logically. She could return east on the next stage, but the return journey would consume half her remaining funds, and Boston held nothing for her now. Her teaching position had been filled, her modest rooms let to another tenant, her few possessions either packed in her trunk or sold to finance her journey west. She could continue to the nearest sizable town, Fort Worth perhaps, and seek employment as a teacher or governess. Her credentials were excellent, her references impeccable, but positions for unmarried female teachers were scarce in the West, where education often took a distant second place to survival. Or she could remain here, at least temporarily, and assess whether this failed journey might yet yield some opportunity she couldn't presently envision. The decision, she realized, didn't need to be made immediately. Morning would bring clearer thinking and perhaps new possibilities. Sleep eluded her as the unfamiliar sounds of the Texas night filtered through the thin walls. Cattle lowing in the distance, coyotes calling to one another across the open range, the occasional creak of the bunkhouse settling in the cooling night air. So different from Boston's nighttime symphony of carriages, neighbors, and distant church bells. Dawn arrived with startling suddenness, the first golden rays of sunlight streaming through the small window beside her bed. Catherine rose, dressed in her second-best traveling outfit, and arranged her hair in a simple but tidy style. Whatever decisions this day brought, she would face them with dignity and self-possession. Outside, ranch life had already begun. 2 cowboys she hadn't seen the previous evening were leading horses from the corral toward the barn. A thin spiral of smoke rose from the stovepipe protruding from the bunkhouse roof, suggesting breakfast preparations were underway. Abernathy emerged from the barn, his limp more pronounced in the morning hours. He carried a small pail of fresh milk, evidence that at least one cow had survived whatever misfortunes had befallen the ranch. "Morning, Miss Murray," he called, his tone cautiously respectful. "Coffee's hot, if you're of a mind for it. The bunkhouses." Main room served as both kitchen and dining area for the ranch hands. A large cast-iron stove dominated one wall, while a rough-hewn table with benches occupied the center of the space. Everything was simple but scrupulously clean. Testament to Abernathy's standards, if not his comforts. The two cowboys already seated at the table stood awkwardly as she entered. One was young, barely out of boyhood, with a shock of sandy hair and sunburned cheeks. The other was older, perhaps 50, with an impressive mustache and calloused hands that spoke of a lifetime of hard work. "Ma'am," the older man said, nodding. "Respectfully. Jed Turner, this here's Billy." "Gentlemen," Catherine replied with a small nod. "Catherine Murray." Breakfast was a simple but hearty affair. Cornmeal mush, salt pork, fresh biscuits, and strong black coffee. The men ate quickly and with minimal conversation, clearly unaccustomed to female company in their dining quarters. As soon as they finished, they departed for their daily tasks, leaving Catherine alone with Abernathy. Preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "The stage to Fort Worth comes through Thursday," he said, pouring her another cup of coffee. "That gives you 3 days to consider your options." "What would you do in my position, Mr. Abernathy?" she asked, surprising herself with the directness of the question. He considered this seriously, showing her the respect of honest assessment rather than platitudes. "Depends on what you're running from and what you're running to," he said finally. "Most folks headed west are doing one or the other, sometimes both." The simple insight struck Catherine with unexpected force. He was right. She had been running from the limited prospects of a spinster teacher in Boston, from the pitying glances of married former classmates, from the growing certainty that her life would be defined by what she lacked rather than what she might build. "I came seeking a future of my own making," she said carefully. "Marriage was to be the vehicle, not the destination." Abernathy nodded, understanding more than she had voiced. "Land's still good here," he observed. "Water's reliable even in drought years. Cattle are healthy. House can be rebuilt by anyone with determination and some help." He paused. "Crawford's brother may claim it all, but there's no certainty in that. He's a city man with no interest in ranching." "Are you suggesting I might have some claim to this property?" Catherine asked, startled by the implication. "Not suggesting anything, just laying out facts," Abernathy replied. "Crawford's guilt is established. His property will either go to kin or be sold to cover debts. But possession counts for something in these parts, and a woman willing to prove up the land might find the law takes an interest in her claim, especially if she can show she came in good faith." It was an audacious idea that she, Catherine Murray from Boston, might stake a claim to this damaged ranch rather than retreating in defeat. The practical obstacles were enormous: rebuilding a house, managing livestock, establishing legal rights in a territory where she knew no one and had no standing. Yet, as she looked through the window at the rolling Texas landscape, golden in the morning light, something stirred within her, a sense of possibility, of potential not yet extinguished by Nathan Crawford's deception or criminal acts. "I'd need to understand more about the legal standing," she said, thinking aloud, "and about the practical management of such an operation." "Judge Williams comes through town every second Monday," Abernathy offered. "He's a fair man, not easily influenced by local interests. As for the practical side," he hesitated, "I've managed this ranch in truth, if not in name, for the past 2 years. Crawford was more interested in his side ventures than the day-to-day operations." The implication was clear. Abernathy possessed the knowledge she would need, while she potentially offered a path to securing the property's future that didn't involve surrendering it to an absentee owner. "Would you continue as foreman if ownership changed hands?" she asked. "Depends on the new owner," he replied honestly. "Some would bring their own people. Others might see the value in experience." Catherine made a decision that would alter the trajectory of her life. "I believe I'll delay my departure until I've had the opportunity to speak with Judge Williams," she said. "In the meantime, perhaps you might acquaint me with the operation of this ranch. If I'm to make an informed decision about my future, I should understand what I'd be undertaking." Something like approval flickered in Abernathy's weathered face. "Ranch life isn't easy, Miss Murray, especially for someone raised with Eastern comforts." "I wasn't raised with many comforts, Mr. Abernathy," she corrected gently. "My father was a schoolteacher who died of pneumonia when I was 16. My mother took in mending to keep us housed and fed until consumption claimed her 3 years ago. I've been supporting myself by teaching since I was 18 years old." Her candor seemed to settle something for the foreman. He nodded once. Decision made. "We'll start with a proper tour of the property," he said, rising from the table. "Best you know exactly what you're considering before you commit yourself." As they stepped outside into the bright Texas morning, Catherine felt a strange sense of alignment, as though the terrible shock of her arrival had somehow set her onto a path, more genuine than the one she had originally envisioned. Nathan Crawford had lied about many things, but the land itself was real. The opportunity it represented was tangible. Whether she stayed or continued her journey, this moment of standing on Texas soil, considering possibilities that would have been unthinkable in Boston, represented something profound, the first truly independent choice of her adult life. The midday sun beat down relentlessly as Samuel Abernathy led Catherine on horseback across the rolling expanse of the Crawford Ranch. She rode side-saddle on a gentle mare named Willow, her Boston riding lessons proving unexpectedly valuable on the Texas frontier. Property runs from that ridgeline to the creek, then east to the stand of live oaks, Abernathy explained, pointing to landmarks in the distance. About 1,200 acres total, though only 800 usable for grazing. Catherine took in the vastness of it all. In Boston, land was measured in precise city lots. Here, property boundaries followed the natural contours of the landscape, ridges, waterways, and tree lines marking territories in a way no city dweller could fully comprehend. "And the cattle?" she asked, noting several small groups of longhorns scattered across the grassland. 120 head, give or take. Not a large herd by Texas standards, but healthy stock with good bloodlines. Pride crept into Abernathy's voice. Been culling the weaker animals, improving the strain year by year. They rode past a small stream where cattle gathered to drink. Beyond it lay open pasture land dotted with mesquite and prickly pear. In the distance, a line of cottonwoods marked a larger watercourse. "West pasture there has the sweetest grass," Abernathy continued. "East section's rockier, better in wet seasons when the lower ground gets boggy." Catherine absorbed every detail, mentally cataloguing the information. If she were to pursue a claim on this property, understanding its attributes and challenges would be essential. The land itself was beautiful in a stark, uncompromising way, nothing like the manicured parks and ordered gardens of Boston, but alive with a wild vitality that stirred something unexpected within her. They crested a small rise, and Abernathy pointed toward a distant fence line. "Crawford's, or I should say the ranch's, northern boundary. Mason property beyond that. Old Jacob Mason's been trying to buy this land for 5 years. Offered Crawford fair price twice, got refused both times." Why would Mr. Crawford refuse? If the offer was fair, Catherine asked. Abernathy shrugged. Spite, mostly. Mason called him out for cheating at cards 3 years back. Some men carry grudges to their graves. This new insight into Nathan Crawford's character further confirmed Catherine's growing suspicion that fate had done her a favor by preventing their marriage. A man who would risk hanging over horse theft and maintain petty feuds with neighbors was unlikely to have made a suitable husband, regardless of his well-composed letters. They turned their horses back toward the ranch buildings, taking a different route that passed through a small apple orchard, perhaps 20 trees in neat rows, their branches heavy with fruit approaching ripeness. Crawford did plant these, as he wrote, Abernathy noted, following her gaze. One of the few promises he kept said his bride would want fresh fruit for preserving. The small kindness in Nathan's otherwise fraudulent representations touched Catherine. Unexpectedly, perhaps there had been moments of genuine intention buried within his deceptions. As they approached the burned house, Catherine studied it with new eyes. The stone chimney still stood, as did most of the foundation. The wooden structure itself was destroyed, but the bones of what had been and what might be rebuilt remained identifiable. "How large was the house before the fire?" she asked, dismounting carefully from Willow. 4 rooms, main living area, kitchen at the back, 2 bedrooms. Abernathy pointed to different sections of the charred remains. Nothing fancy, but solid construction. Crawford hired a proper carpenter from Fort Worth for the framing. Catherine walked the perimeter of the foundation, mentally reconstructing the layout. And the fire started? Lightning strike hit the roof during that big storm 3 weeks back. By the time we spotted it from the north pasture, flames had taken hold. Saved what furniture we could, but the structure was gone within an hour. They continued to the workshop, a sturdy structure that had been spared the fire's destruction. Inside, Catherine discovered woodworking tools, a forge for basic metalwork, and all manner of supplies for ranch maintenance. The space spoke of practical capability and self-sufficiency, essential to survival so far from towns and services. "Most everything needed for rebuilding is here," Abernathy observed, watching her examine the tools. "Lumber would need ordering from Taylor's Mill near Fort Worth, but the skills are available if one knows who to hire." By late afternoon, they had examined every aspect of the ranch operations: the barn with its tack room and hayloft, the smokehouse, the spring house where perishables were kept cool, the chicken coop currently housing 6 hens and a rooster, and the vegetable garden now overgrown with weeds, but still producing squash, beans, and tomatoes. As they returned to the bunkhouse, Catherine's mind whirled with possibilities and practical considerations. The ranch represented both opportunity and enormous challenge. Even with her teaching credentials and the remainder of her savings, establishing a legal claim and rebuilding would stretch her resources to their limits. "Thank you for the thorough introduction," she said as they unsaddled the horses. "You've given me much to consider." Abernathy nodded, his expression unreadable. "Judge Williams will be in Rawlins Creek next Monday. That gives you 5 days to decide whether to speak with him about potential claims. And in the meantime, Miss Murray, I suggest you learn as much as possible about what running a ranch entails. Theory's fine for making decisions, but practice tells the true story." The following morning, Catherine rose before dawn, determined to observe the ranch's daily operations from beginning to end. She dressed in her most practical attire, a simple brown skirt and white shirtwaist, and joined the men for breakfast. As they prepared for the day's work, Jed Turner, the older cowhand, regarded her with surprise when she asked to accompany them on their morning rounds. "Begging your pardon, ma'am, but ranch work ain't suitable for a lady's observation," he said, clearly uncomfortable. "Nevertheless, Mr. Turner, if I'm to make an informed decision about my future here, I must understand all aspects of the operation." Her tone was polite but firm. Abernathy, entering in time to overhear the exchange, intervened. "Miss Murray can ride with me this morning. East pasture fence needs checking after those strays broke through yesterday." Catherine spent that day, and the 4 that followed, immersing herself in the practical realities of ranch life. She learned to identify signs of illness in cattle, to distinguish various grasses and their suitability for grazing, to assess water quality, and to recognize the myriad threats that could compromise a herd's health and a ranch's profitability. Each evening, exhausted but exhilarated by new knowledge, she recorded her observations in a journal, creating a practical reference for future decisions. The work was harder than anything she had experienced in Boston, the days longer, the physical demands greater. Yet she found unexpected satisfaction in tangible accomplishments: a mended fence, a properly stored harness, a row of garden weeds successfully cleared. On her third day, she approached Abernathy with a practical proposal. "The garden is salvageable," she said. "With proper attention, it could provide vegetables for the household through fall and preserves for winter." He studied her dirt-streaked face and calloused hands with something like respect. "You've got a feeling for growing things?" "My mother maintained a small kitchen garden behind our Boston home. Space was limited, but she coaxed remarkable yields from every inch." Catherine gestured toward the overgrown plot. "This soil is richer. The growing season is longer. With proper management, it could contribute significantly to the ranch's self-sufficiency." Abernathy considered this. "Garden tools are in the shed. Jed's wife used to help with planting before she passed. He might have suggestions about what thrives here." Catherine spent the following morning rescuing the garden from weeks of neglect. She cleared weeds, staked drooping tomato vines, and discovered squash, peppers, and beans still producing despite inattention. Jed Turner, initially skeptical of her efforts, eventually offered grudging advice about local growing conditions. "Gotta watch them tomatoes when the heat peaks," he cautioned. "Need shade cloth or they'll scorch. And them beans like more water than you'd think, coming from up east." By the end of her fourth day, Catherine had expanded her knowledge from the garden to the kitchen. The bunkhouse's cooking arrangements were primitive but functional, and she insisted on contributing to meal preparation as fair exchange for her temporary lodging. "No need for that, Miss Murray," Billy protested when she tied an apron over her skirt and began peeling potatoes for the evening stew. "We manage fine." "I'm certain you do," she replied. "But while I'm benefiting from your hospitality, I'll contribute what skills I possess. Besides, cooking is knowledge, and I'm gathering all I can before Monday's decision." The simple act of preparing meals alongside the ranch hands gradually eased the formality between them. Over dinner that evening, conversation flowed more naturally than in previous days, with Jed sharing stories of early Texas ranching and Billy enthusiastically describing a horse-breaking technique he'd observed on a neighboring property. On Saturday, the ranch's isolation was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. Catherine was in the garden harvesting tomatoes when the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention. A well-dressed man in his 50s rode toward the main buildings, his horse's quality and his own attire suggesting prosperity. Abernathy emerged from the barn, his posture noticeably tense. "Jacob Mason," he murmured to Catherine as she approached. "Neighboring rancher, I mentioned. Don't expect pleasantries." Mason dismounted with the ease of a lifetime horseman, his assessing gaze taking in the burned house, Catherine's presence, and Abernathy's guarded stance. "Samuel," he acknowledged with a curt nod, "heard Crawford's finally facing justice for those altered brands. About time." "Mr. Mason," Abernathy replied neutrally. "What brings you to Crawford land?" Mason's gaze shifted to Catherine, curiosity evident in his expression. "Word travels. Heard a lady arrived expecting to meet Crawford. Thought I'd pay a neighborly call and clarify some realities about this property." Catherine stepped forward, extending her hand with the poise her mother had instilled despite their reduced circumstances. "Catherine Murray. I arrived from Boston earlier this week." Mason tipped his hat, momentarily disarmed by her directness. "Jacob Mason, ma'am, own the Double Circle Ranch adjoining this property." He gestured toward the burned structure. "Sorry for your disappointment. Crawford misrepresented more than just horse brands, it seems." "So I've discovered," Catherine acknowledged, "though the land itself appears to have merit beyond its former owner's character." Mason's eyes narrowed slightly at this response. "Land's decent enough. would integrate well with my operation. He turned to Abernathy. I'll be speaking with the territorial authorities about purchasing this property once Crawford's conviction is finalized, willing to take on the existing hands if they're interested in staying on. The statement, while presented as generosity, carried an unmistakable message. Mason considered the Crawford ranch as good as his and was making preliminary arrangements accordingly. That's uncommonly thoughtful, Catherine replied before Abernathy could respond. Though I understand the legal disposition of the property remains undetermined, pending multiple considerations. Mason studied her with new intensity. No offense intended, Miss Murray, but a woman alone has limited prospects for property ownership in these parts, especially when competing claims exist. Crawford's brother in San Antonio has already corresponded with me about purchasing his potential inheritance. How fortuitous for you to have such foresight, Catherine observed, her tone pleasant but her meaning clear. She was not so easily dismissed. Mason remounted his horse, his expression calculating. Judge Williams arrives Monday. Perhaps clarity will follow. He nodded to both of them. Good day. As Mason rode away, Abernathy turned to Catherine with grudging admiration. Most folks find Mason intimidating. He's not accustomed to being challenged, especially by women. I taught 30 Boston children of varying temperaments for 8 years, Mr. Abernathy. It takes more than a presumptuous rancher to unsettle me. Nevertheless, Mason's confidence regarding the property's disposition was disquieting. If Crawford's brother had already indicated willingness to sell, her potential claim would face significant obstacles. That evening, after the men had retired to their quarters, Catherine sat alone by the bunkhouse stove, reviewing her journal entries from the past days. She had learned much about the ranch's operations, its strengths and vulnerabilities, its potential for improvement. The question remaining was whether pursuing a claim represented boldness or foolishness. A soft knock interrupted her reflections. Abernathy stood in the doorway, holding a small wooden box. Found these when we salvaged what we could from the house fire, he said, setting the box on the table. Crawford's papers. Thought they might help with your decision-making. Inside the box lay a collection of documents, property deeds, cattle purchase records, tax receipts, and correspondence. Catherine examined them carefully, her teaching experience making her methodical in organizing information. Several items proved immediately significant. The original property deed, dated 1868, listed a purchase price substantially below what the land would command now. Tax payments were current through the previous quarter. A letter from Crawford's brother Michael, dated 3 months earlier, expressed disinterest in the ranch and suggested Nathan find another investment partner if expansion capital is needed. Most revealing was a document at the bottom of the collection, Catherine's own letters to Nathan, bundled together with the photograph she had sent upon his request. Her words, earnest and hopeful, now seemed painfully naive. The Catherine who had written those letters felt like a stranger to the woman who now read them under the light of a Texas oil lamp. He kept them, she murmured, surprised despite herself. Abernathy, who had remained by the door, nodded. Was excited when your acceptance came. Had the men whitewashed the house interior, ordered new curtain material from Fort Worth. The contradiction between Crawford's criminal activities and his apparent sincerity regarding their marriage was difficult to reconcile. When did the horse theft begin? About 6 months ago, near as I can figure. Ranch was doing all right, but Crawford always wanted more. Faster growth, bigger profits, started small, a horse here and there, altered brands, sold to buyers who didn't ask questions, then graduated to larger operations. And you didn't report him. The question wasn't accusatory, merely seeking understanding. Abernathy's expression tightened. "Complicated loyalty, Miss Murray. I've worked this land 5 years, helped build it from scrub prairie to working ranch. Reporting Crawford meant risking everything we'd built. By the time the thefts became too significant to ignore, the Rangers were already investigating." The honesty of his answer emphasized the complex realities of frontier life, where law and justice often operated in murky territory, and survival sometimes demanded uncomfortable compromises. Catherine returned to the documents, searching for anything that might strengthen a potential claim. What she found instead was a half-completed letter from Crawford to herself, dated 3 days before his arrest. The content was surprising. "My dear Catherine, as your arrival draws near, I find myself compelled toward greater honesty than our correspondence has previously contained. While the ranch exists as described, certain aspects of my business dealings would not withstand the scrutiny of a wife with your evident principles. I have undertaken actions that, while profitable, exist in the shadow of law and common decency. Upon reflection, I cannot in good conscience bind you to a man whose character fails to match the portrait I've painted in our exchanges. Yet selfishly, I cannot bring myself to directly discourage your journey, as the prospect of your arrival has become the brightest aspect of my future. Perhaps upon meeting, you will discern my unworthiness and choose to continue your journey. Elsewhere, should that occur, I will provide funds for safe passage to whatever destination you select, as fair compensation for the disappointment." The letter remained unsigned, apparently abandoned before completion. Whether Crawford had intended to actually send it remained unclear, but its existence suggested a complexity to his character beyond simple villainy. "He knew he wasn't worthy," Catherine said softly, showing Abernathy the letter. "Yet couldn't bring himself to prevent my coming." "Man of contradictions," Abernathy acknowledged, "capable of both decency and its opposite, sometimes in the same day." Catherine carefully returned the documents to their box, her decision crystallizing. "I'll speak with Judge Williams on Monday," she said with quiet determination, not with certainty of outcome, but with clarity of purpose. Abernathy studied her face in the lamplight. "And that purpose would be?" "To build something honest from these complicated beginnings," she replied. "To see if a woman alone can transform deception into something worthwhile." For the first time since her arrival, Abernathy's weathered face showed a genuine smile. "Judge Williams appreciates forthright speech and clear intentions. You'll do well with him." As Catherine prepared for sleep that night, her Boston life seemed increasingly distant, like a story read long ago rather than her own recent history. In just 1 week, the rhythms and realities of ranch life had begun to reshape her understanding of possibility. The burned house, rather than representing shattered dreams, now appeared as an opportunity, a chance to build something that was truly hers from the very foundation. The garden's resilience, despite neglect, mirrored her own unexpected adaptability. The vastness of the Texas landscape, initially overwhelming, now promised a freedom she had never experienced within Boston's rigid social confines. Monday would bring Judge Williams and the first test of her resolve. Jacob Mason's confidence suggested opposition ahead. Crawford's brother remained an unknown factor in the property's disposition. The legal path would undoubtedly present obstacles she couldn't yet foresee. Yet as she drifted toward sleep, Catherine felt a strange sense of rightness, as though the terrible shock of her arrival had somehow set her onto a path more authentic than the one she had originally sought. Whether the Crawford Ranch became hers or simply served as temporary shelter during her transition to a new life, these days of adaptation and discovery had already transformed her in ways that could never be undone. Monday dawned with a sky the color of burnished copper, promising another scorching Texas day. Catherine dressed with particular care, selecting her navy traveling suit, the most formal attire she had brought west. Her Boston sensibilities reminded her that first impressions carried weight, especially when approaching a legal authority. Abernathy had arranged for Billy to drive her to Rawlins Creek in the ranch wagon. Judge Williams holds court in the back room of Simmons Mercantile, he explained as they prepared to depart. Arrives on the morning stage and leaves after sundown. Handles everything from land disputes to marriage licenses in a single day. And Mr. Mason, Catherine asked, will he be presenting his interests as well? Count on it. Mason's been wanting this water access for years. Crawford's arrest is opportunity he won't ignore. The journey to town took nearly 2 hours over rutted trails that barely deserved the designation of roads. Catherine used the time to organize her thoughts and review the documents she had selected from Crawford's papers, the original deed, tax receipts, and her correspondence with the imprisoned rancher. Rawlins Creek proved to be little more than a cluster of buildings arranged along a single dusty street. A general store, saloon, small church, livery stable, and assorted businesses comprised the entirety of the settlement. The stagecoach had evidently arrived recently, as several travelers still stood outside the small hotel, stretching their legs after the journey. "That's Judge Williams," Billy murmured, nodding toward an imposing figure descending from the hotel porch. The judge was tall and broad-shouldered, with a neatly trimmed white beard and the grave demeanor of a man accustomed to authority. He carried a leather portfolio and walked with purpose toward the mercantile. Catherine smoothed her skirt and adjusted her hat. "I'll meet you at the general store in 2 hours," she told Billy. "Thank you for the transportation." "Yes'm," the young cowhand replied, concern evident in his expression. "Good luck with the judge. He's fair-minded, folks say, but not one for foolishness." Simmons Mercantile occupied the largest building in Rawlins Creek, offering everything from foodstuffs to farming equipment. The proprietor, a thin man with spectacles perched on a prominent nose, directed Catherine to the back room, where Judge Williams had established his temporary court. "He's seeing Mason first," Simmons informed her, with undisguised curiosity. "Land matters, I understand. You'll be next if you're waiting on legal business." Catherine nodded her thanks and settled onto a bench near the door, listening to the murmur of voices from within. Though she couldn't distinguish specific words, the confident tone of Mason's speech carried through the thin wall. Occasionally, punctuated by the judge's deeper questions, after 20 minutes, the door opened, and Jacob Mason emerged, satisfaction evident in his bearing. He paused momentarily upon seeing Catherine, surprise quickly masked by a tight smile. "Miss Murray, following through on your interest, I see. Admirable perseverance, though perhaps misplaced in this instance." His condescension was thinly veiled. "Mr. Mason," she acknowledged with a slight nod, "I believe in exploring all possibilities before surrendering to assumptions." His smile tightened further. "Judge Williams will explain the legal realities. Good day to you." As Mason departed, a clerk appeared in the doorway. "Judge will see you now, ma'am." The makeshift courtroom contained only a table, several chairs, and a bookshelf holding legal volumes. Judge Williams looked up from his papers as Catherine entered, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts on finding a well-dressed Boston woman in his temporary chambers. "Good morning," he greeted her, gesturing toward the chair opposite his table. "I understand you have business requiring legal consideration." "Yes, Your Honor. Catherine Murray." She seated herself, back straight, hands folded neatly in her lap. "I've come regarding the Crawford Ranch property." The judge's eyebrows rose slightly. "Indeed. Mr. Mason has just presented his interest in purchasing said property once legal disposition is determined following Crawford's trial." "I'm aware of Mr. Mason's intentions," Catherine replied evenly. "However, I believe my own connection to the property merits consideration." She explained her situation concisely, her correspondence with Nathan Crawford, the journey west to become his wife, her arrival to find him imprisoned and the homestead burned, and her week spent learning the ranch's operations. Judge Williams listened without interruption, making occasional notes. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled before him. "A troubling situation, Miss Murray, and you have my sympathy for the deception practiced upon you. However, I fail to see how these circumstances establish any legal claim to Crawford's property." Catherine removed the packet of letters from her reticule. "I have extensive correspondence from Mr. Crawford explicitly inviting me to become mistress of his ranch through marriage. While the marriage cannot now occur, my journey was made in good faith based on these representations." She placed the letters on the table. "I also have the original property deed and evidence that taxes are current. Through last quarter, the judge examined the letters with professional thoroughness, his expression thoughtful. Interesting. You're suggesting an implied contract of sorts, that Crawford's invitation for you to share ownership through marriage, combined with your good faith actions in response, creates an equitable interest." "Precisely, Your Honor. Furthermore, I've spent the past week actively maintaining and improving the property, managing the garden, assisting with ranch operations, and planning reconstruction of the burned dwelling. My actions demonstrate commitment to the property's continuation as a productive enterprise." Williams stroked his beard contemplatively. "Creative legal reasoning, Miss Murray. Not without merit, though certainly unconventional." He made another note. "Crawford's brother in San Antonio has filed an inheritance claim as next of kin. Mason has offered to purchase from him once rights are established. The territorial prosecutor expects Crawford's conviction within the month, at which point property disposition becomes relevant." "And in the interim?" Catherine asked. "In the interim, the property remains in legal limbo. Crawford technically retains ownership until conviction, though he cannot actively manage it from a jail cell." The judge studied her intently. "You're currently residing at the ranch?" "In the foreman's quarters, with his permission while he uses the barn. The arrangement is temporary and entirely proper, with ranch hands as witnesses to propriety." Williams nodded. "And your intentions regarding the property, should your claim receive consideration?" Catherine had anticipated this question. "To rebuild the dwelling, maintain the cattle operation with Mr. Abernathy's continued expertise as foreman, and potentially establish a small school for neighboring ranch children currently lacking educational opportunities." This last piece of information seemed to catch the judge's interest. "You're qualified as a teacher. 8 years' experience in Boston schools, with references available by telegraph if required." She withdrew her teaching credentials from the packet of documents. "Education is severely lacking in this region, from what I've observed." Williams examined her credentials with greater attention than he had shown the ranch documents. "Indeed it is, Miss Murray. My own grandchildren ride 12 miles to reach the nearest schoolhouse, and the teacher there is minimally qualified." He returned to her papers, organizing them methodically. "I cannot make any definitive ruling today regarding property rights. Crawford's conviction must be finalized, his brother's inheritance claim properly addressed." He glanced up, his expression less severe than before. "However, I can issue a temporary order permitting your continued residence and basic maintenance of the property pending final disposition, provided you continue the current arrangement regarding separate quarters and propriety." Relief washed through Catherine. While far from a final victory, the judge's order would prevent Mason from taking any immediate action to claim the property. "Thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate your consideration." "Do not thank me yet, Miss Murray. Your path remains difficult. Mason is influential, with financial resources and connections throughout the territory. Crawford's brother has law on his side regarding inheritance." Williams gathered his papers. "But intelligence and determination sometimes balance such scales, particularly when combined with community benefit like education." As Catherine left the mercantile, she felt both encouraged and sobered by the judge's assessment. Legal validation of her temporary residence bought valuable time, but the challenges ahead remained substantial. Billy waited by the wagon, his youthful face anxious. "How'd it go, Mom? Judge Williams has granted temporary recognition of my residence and maintenance rights," she explained, climbing onto the wagon seat. "Not ownership, but a beginning." The young cowhand smiled broadly. "That's something. Mason came through looking like he'd bitten a green persimmon. Figured you must have said something the judge liked." "Schools," Catherine replied. "Judge Williams, as grandchildren without proper educational opportunities." On the return journey, Catherine's mind raced with plans. The judge's temporary order provided breathing room, but establishing a stronger position would require strategic action on multiple fronts. The ranch needed to demonstrate viability under her guidance. The community needed to see value in her presence beyond the property itself. And most critically, she needed legal counsel regarding Crawford's brother's inheritance claim. They had driven perhaps halfway back to the ranch when they encountered an unexpected delay. A wagon had broken an axle on the rough trail, stranding an elderly man and a young woman who couldn't have been more than 16. The girl cradled an infant, while the man examined the damaged vehicle with evident dismay. "Hold up, Billy," Catherine directed. "They need assistance." The stranded travelers were Luther Simmons, no relation to the mercantile owner, and his granddaughter Hannah, traveling from their homestead to Rawlins Creek for supplies. The broken axle had left them without transportation for themselves, their infant, or the desperately needed provisions they had intended to purchase. "We can transport you to the Crawford Ranch," Catherine offered. "Mr. Abernathy is quite skilled with repairs. He might be able to fashion a temporary axle to get your wagon moving again." Relief washed over the older man's weathered face. "That's Christian charity, ma'am. We'd be most grateful." As they traveled, Catherine learned the Simmons family operated a small homestead 10 miles southwest of the Crawford property. Luther, his son Daniel, and Daniel's wife Emily had established their farm 3 years earlier. Hannah had married a neighboring farmer's son the previous year, but was temporarily living with her grandparents after her husband enlisted in the cavalry. "Emmy's been poorly since the baby came," Luther explained, concern evident in his voice. "That's why we were heading to town. Need medicine from the doctor more than my home remedies can manage." Catherine glanced at Hannah, noting the girl's evident exhaustion and worry. "What are her symptoms?" "Fever comes and goes, no appetite. Weak as a newborn kitten." Hannah's voice trembled. "She can barely nurse little Thomas. Grandpa's willow bark tea helps some, but not enough." The description suggested childbed fever, a condition Catherine had witnessed among acquaintances in Boston. Without proper medical attention, Emily's condition could become dire. "The medicine you seek," Catherine asked Luther, "did the doctor specify sulfate of quinine?" The old man looked surprised. "That's it exactly. You know doctoring, ma'am. Not doctoring, but nursing basics. My mother served as a neighborhood midwife in Boston." Catherine made a swift decision. "I have medicines in my trunk from my journey west, including quinine. Your daughter-in-law is welcome to it." Hannah's eyes filled with tears. "God must have put you in our path today, ma'am." Upon reaching the ranch, Abernathy immediately set to work examining the broken axle, while Catherine retrieved her medical supplies. The small bottle of quinine had been packed as a precaution for the western journey, where malaria sometimes occurred near riverlands. "Take this to your daughter-in-law," she instructed Luther, providing careful dosage directions. "It should reduce the fever within a day if administered properly. I've included clean bandages and carbolic soap as well." Luther clutched the package with reverent care. "How can we repay such kindness, Miss Murray? We're not people of means." Catherine considered the weather-beaten farmer with his anxious granddaughter, and the infant now sleeping in her arms, An idea formed, one that might serve both the Simmons family's needs and her own strategic position. "Do neighboring families have school-aged children without access to education?" she asked. Luther nodded emphatically. 5 homesteads within riding distance, at least 12 children between them. Nearest schools 20 miles south. Most families can't spare children for the journey, especially during planting and harvest. "I'm a qualified teacher," Catherine explained. "I'm considering establishing a small school at the Crawford Ranch if my residence becomes permanent. Would families support such an endeavor?" "Support it?" Luther's face brightened. "Miss Murray, they'd praise the Almighty for it. Our Daniel learned his letters, but poor Hannah barely knows how to sign her name. All these children growing up without proper learning, it's a burden on every parent's heart." By evening, the situation had evolved in unexpected ways. Abernathy had fashioned a temporary axle that would allow the Simmons wagon to return home, but darkness was falling rapidly. At Catherine's insistence, Luther and Hannah remained overnight, with Hannah and the baby occupying Catherine's bed, while she shared the main bunkhouse room with the ranch hands. The arrangement was unconventional, but the presence of a young mother and infant transformed the bunkhouse dynamics completely. Even Jed, normally gruff and reserved, showed a surprising gentleness toward Hannah and the infant, whittling a small wooden rattle as the evening progressed. Over the simple supper Catherine prepared, Luther shared valuable information about the surrounding community, which families had children of school age, which homesteaders were struggling and might appreciate employment opportunities, which neighboring ranchers held influence with territorial authorities. "Mason's got money and connections," the old farmer acknowledged, "but folks around here haven't forgotten how he forced the Wilkins family off their homestead 3 years back. Legal on paper, but hard-hearted in practice." Catherine absorbed every detail, recognizing that community support might ultimately prove as valuable as legal arguments in establishing her position. And Crawford, how was he regarded locally? Luther's expression turned thoughtful. Kept to himself mostly, wasn't unfair in business dealings, paid his debts prompt. The horse thieving surprised some, though others said a man that was restless was bound for trouble eventually. After Luther and Hannah retired to their respective sleeping arrangements, Catherine joined Abernathy outside. The night air had cooled, and stars blazed across the vast Texas sky with an intensity she had never witnessed in Boston. "Judge granted temporary recognition," she informed him, explaining the details of her meeting with Williams. "Not ownership, but the right to maintain residence and continue basic operations pending final disposition." Abernathy nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Good first step. Mason won't be pleased." "No," Catherine agreed, but Judge Williams seemed interested in the possibility of educational opportunities for local children. "I believe that might be a path to stronger community standing." "Clever approach," Abernathy acknowledged. "Education carries weight, especially with families struggling to provide basics for their children." He hesitated. "If you're truly considering teaching, alongside ranch management, you should know the old bunkhouse could be converted to a schoolroom with minimal effort. It was the original homestead cabin before Crawford built the main house. This possibility had not occurred to Catherine, and it sparked immediate planning. A dedicated school building, even a humble one, would demonstrate serious commitment to community service. Combined with her teaching credentials and Judge Williams's apparent interest in educational opportunities, it could significantly strengthen her position. "That's valuable information, Mr. Abernathy. Thank you." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the stars. Catherine found herself increasingly appreciative of the foreman's quiet competence and straightforward manner. In just 1 week, he had transitioned from wary stranger to essential ally, his knowledge and support proving invaluable at every turn. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly, giving voice to the question that had lingered unspoken. You could simply wait for Mason or Crawford's brother to claim the property, potentially maintaining your position regardless of ownership. Abernathy considered the question with characteristic thoroughness before responding. 5 years invested in this land. Built something from nothing. Mason would absorb it into his existing operation. No need for a foreman with a bad leg when he's already got 3 capable ones. His expression hardened slightly. And Crawford's brother's a city lawyer with no interest in ranching. He'd sell to the highest bidder, likely Mason, and be done with it. He glanced toward the burned house, its dark outline visible against the star-filled sky. You see potential here, not just profit but purpose. Community benefit through education, continuation of what's been built, a slight shrug. Worth supporting such vision, even if chances seem slim. The simple honesty of his assessment touched Catherine deeply. In Boston, alliances and partnerships typically involved elaborate social calculations and unspoken obligations. Abernathy's straightforward commitment to the land and recognition of shared purpose represented something refreshingly direct. "I appreciate your candor," she said, "and your support. I doubt I would have made it through this first week without your guidance." "You're stronger than you appear at first glance, Miss Murray." There was unmistakable respect in his tone. Most Eastern women would have returned on the first available stage after finding their intended groom imprisoned and their future home in ashes. The acknowledgement of her resilience, coming from a man who had clearly faced his own significant challenges, carried particular weight. In that moment, Catherine recognized that their alliance had evolved beyond mere practical cooperation. They had become partners in a shared vision, one that faced substantial obstacles but offered meaningful rewards if successful. "We should discuss next steps," she said, her mind returning to practical matters. "Judge Williams' temporary order provides opportunity, but Mason won't abandon his interests easily." "No," Abernathy agreed, "and we should expect direct action soon. Mason's not a man to accept judicial delay without response." The prediction would prove accurate far sooner than either of them anticipated. By morning's light, their alliance would face its first significant test, and the scope of opposition arrayed against Catherine's fragile claim would become starkly apparent. Dawn arrived with commotion, the sound of multiple horses approaching at a gallop, their riders making no attempt at stealth. Catherine, already awake and dressed, stepped onto the bunkhouse porch as Jacob Mason and 3 of his ranch hands reined to a stop before the building. Abernathy emerged from the barn, his expression wary as he positioned himself between Catherine and the mounted men. "Early for social calls, Mason," he observed, his tone deceptively mild. Mason ignored him, focusing on Catherine. "I've received word of Judge Williams' temporary order, Miss Murray. A clever maneuver, but ultimately futile." He extended an envelope. "This is a formal offer for your interests in this property. $500, far more than your inconvenience warrants, but I prefer clean resolutions." Catherine accepted the envelope without opening it. "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Mason. I'll consider it alongside other options." Mason's facade of civility slipped slightly. "There are no other viable options, Miss Murray. Crawford's brother has agreed to sell his inheritance rights once established. The judge's order merely delays the inevitable transfer." "Perhaps," she acknowledged, "but legal matters often contain unexpected complications. Until final disposition, I'll continue maintaining the property as permitted by Judge Williams." She gestured toward the bunkhouse where Luther and Hannah were now visible in the doorway, "including establishing educational services for neighboring families." Mason's gaze shifted to the Simmons family, his expression darkening. "Community charity won't strengthen tenuous legal claims, Miss Murray, nor will it protect against practical difficulties that often befall isolated properties." The threat beneath his words was barely veiled. Cattle stray, accidents occur, supplies become difficult to obtain when merchants understand their long-term interests. Before Catherine could respond, Luther Simmons stepped forward, his aged frame somehow dignified despite his rough clothing. "That sounds mighty close to threatening a lady, Mason. Folks around here might take notice of such behavior." Mason's attention shifted to the elderly farmer, contempt evident in his expression. "Careful, Simmons. Your own holdings are precarious enough without involving yourself in others' disputes." Threatening neighbors now, too. Abernathy's voice remained calm, but his stance had subtly shifted. Judge Williams might find such behavior relevant to property disposition considerations. A tense silence followed, broken only by the snorting of horses and the distant lowing of cattle. Mason clearly hadn't expected to find Catherine with allies present, particularly not members of the local community who could witness and report his implied threats. "Consider the offer, Miss Murray," he said finally. "It expires in 3 days." With a curt nod to his men, he wheeled his horse and departed, dust billowing behind the retreating riders. Luther watched them go, his weathered face troubled. Man's used to getting his way through intimidation, been forcing smaller holders out for years. His tactics won't succeed here, Catherine stated with more confidence than she entirely felt. But we should prepare for further attempts at pressure. After the Simmons family departed with expressions of gratitude and promises to spread word about potential schooling, Catherine and Abernathy convened a council with Jed and Billy. The ranch's vulnerability to various forms of sabotage required honest assessment and strategic planning. "Mason's not above tampering with boundary fences to scatter cattle," Jed warned, his usual reticence replaced by practical concern. "Did it to the Henderson place last year. Poor fellow spent weeks rounding up his stock, lost half to thieves. In the process, we'll need regular fence patrols," Abernathy decided. "Alternate routes, varied timing to avoid predictability." "Water's another concern," Billy added. "Creek could be diverted upstream where it crosses Mason's property. Did something similar to the Wilkins homestead before they sold out." Each potential vulnerability was systematically addressed with practical countermeasures. Catherine marveled at the detailed knowledge and practical solutions the men developed, recognizing that their commitment had crystallized around defending the ranch against outside threat. "One more thing," Abernathy said as their council concluded. "Miss Murray needs to learn to handle a firearm. No woman alone in this territory should be without that skill." The suggestion momentarily startled Catherine, whose Boston upbringing had included no such considerations. Yet the practical necessity was undeniable. An isolated property required self-sufficiency in all aspects, including protection. That afternoon, Abernathy provided her first lesson with a Winchester repeating rifle and a Colt revolver. His instruction was methodical and thorough, focusing first on safety and proper handling before advancing to actual firing. Catherine proved a quick study, her teaching experience having cultivated both patience and methodical approach to learning new skills. By the session's end, she could load, aim, and fire both weapons with basic competence, though true proficiency would require regular practice. "Good beginning," Abernathy acknowledged as they walked back to the bunkhouse. "Keep the revolver with you, even inside. Territory has dangers beyond Mason. Rattlesnakes, rabid animals, occasional drifters with bad intentions." The firearm felt foreign against her hip, its weight a constant reminder of frontier realities so different from Boston's civic protections. Yet Catherine recognized it as a necessary adaptation. Like so many others, she had embraced since arriving at the burned homestead. The following day brought unexpected visitors, Daniel Simmons and his wife Emily, accompanied by Luther and Hannah. Emily, still weak from her illness but showing signs of recovery thanks to Catherine's quinine, had insisted on personally expressing gratitude. "The medicine saved her life," Daniel stated simply, emotion evident beneath his restrained manner. "Doc in town said another day without treatment might have been too late," Emily, cradling baby Thomas while seated on the bunkhouse porch, looked up at Catherine with genuine gratitude. "Luther says you're planning to start a school here, Mom. Is it true?" "That's my intention, if circumstances permit," Catherine confirmed. "Do you have older children who might attend?" "Just Thomas for now," Emily replied. "But neighboring families have school-age children with no educational opportunities. The Hendersons have 3, the Clarks have 2 old enough for learning, and the Patterson twins are 7 now." This casual census confirmed what Luther had suggested: sufficient children within riding distance to justify a small school. As they discussed potential arrangements, Daniel mentioned that his brother was a capable carpenter currently seeking work. "Joshua could help with converting the old bunkhouse to a schoolroom," he offered, "and with rebuilding the main house when you're ready. He's been having trouble finding steady work since Mason undercut his bid on the church expansion." Catherine recognized the opportunity immediately. "I'd appreciate discussing possibilities with him. The judge's order permits property maintenance and necessary improvements." By the time the Simmons family departed, preliminary arrangements had been made for Joshua to assess the old bunkhouse the following week. More significantly, word of Catherine's educational plans and her generosity with life-saving medicine would now spread throughout the neighboring homesteads. That evening, Catherine opened Mason's envelope, examining his formal offer with practical consideration. $500 represented a significant sum, enough to establish herself comfortably in a larger town, and perhaps even start a small private school. The rational choice might be accepting this resolution rather than fighting an uncertain legal battle against established interests. She found Abernathy repairing tack in the barn, his skilled hands working leather with practiced efficiency despite his limitation. "Mason's offer," she said, extending the document. $500 for any interest I might claim in the property." Abernathy wiped his hands before accepting the paper, studying its contents with careful attention. "Fair market value for alleged inconvenience," he noted. "Not for property worth 10 times that amount." "It would provide a fresh start elsewhere," Catherine observed, testing the practical considerations aloud. "Without legal battles against overwhelming odds." Abernathy returned the document without comment, resuming his repair work with methodical focus. After several minutes of silence, he spoke without looking up from his task. "Choice is yours alone, Miss Murray, but you've shown unusual determination for someone seeking easier paths." The simple observation crystallized something within Catherine. She had indeed traveled west, seeking determination of her own fate, rather than acceptance of limited options. Surrendering to Mason's pressure, however practical it might appear, would undermine the very independence she had sought. "I'll decline the offer," she decided, politely but firmly. Abernathy nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. Expected nothing less. The following days established new patterns as Catherine divided her time between ranch operations, preparations for converting the old bunkhouse to a schoolroom, and continued exploration of legal strategies. Each evening, she recorded the day's developments and financial expenditures in a leather-bound ledger, creating a documented history of her stewardship. Joshua Simmons proved to be an exceptional craftsman when he arrived to assess the old bunkhouse. In his mid-30s, with the weathered complexion of an outdoorsman, he approached the project with professional thoroughness, examining the structure's soundness before offering recommendations. "Building's solid," he concluded. "Needs new windows. For better light, proper desks for writing lessons, blackboard on that wall. Could add a covered porch for shade during midday break." His detailed estimate for materials and labor was reasonable, particularly considering the strategic value of the improvement. "When could you begin?" Catherine asked. "Tomorrow, if you're..." "Decided," Joshua replied. "Brought tools with me just in case." By week's end, the transformation was well underway. New windows had been installed, allowing natural light to flood the interior. Long tables and benches were taking shape from lumber Joshua had brought in his wagon. The project had attracted additional assistance when Daniel Simmons and 2 neighboring farmers arrived with offers of labor in exchange for future educational opportunities for their children. "We can't offer cash payment," explained Robert Henderson, a solidly built man with 3 young children. "But we value learning and want to support what you're building here." Their involvement represented more than practical assistance. It demonstrated community investment in Catherine's vision, creating witnesses to her legitimate improvement of the property. Each new alliance strengthened her position against Mason's pressure tactics. Ranch operations continued alongside these developments. Catherine insisted on participating in daily chores, from feeding chickens to assisting with cattle management from horseback. Her riding skills improved rapidly with practice, and she gradually acquired the practical knowledge essential to understanding the business aspects of ranching. Abernathy proved an exacting but patient teacher, explaining livestock management, grazing rotation, water conservation, and weather prediction with the same thoroughness he applied to all tasks. Under his guidance, Catherine began to develop genuine competence in areas completely foreign to her Boston experience. Their working relationship evolved into a comfortable partnership based on complementary abilities. Catherine's educational background and organizational skills brought systematic record-keeping and strategic planning to the operation, while Abernathy's practical experience and deep knowledge of the land provided an essential foundation. "Books, balance for the month," she informed him one evening, closing the ledger with satisfaction. "If cattle prices hold through fall, the ranch shows potential for modest profit even with rebuilding expenses." Abernathy nodded appreciatively. "Crawford never maintained proper accounts, ran operations on rough estimates and intuition. Your approach brings clarity. Such moments of mutual respect and acknowledged value occurred with increasing frequency, cementing their partnership through demonstrated competence rather than mere necessity. They developed routines that accommodated each other's strengths and compensated for limitations without drawing attention to them." When Catherine struggled to move heavy feed bags, Abernathy redesigned the storage system to eliminate the need for lifting. When he found certain repair tasks challenging with one arm, she automatically positioned herself to provide steady support without explicit request. Neither mentioned these accommodations. They simply became part of their shared approach to daily challenges. 3 weeks after Judge Williams' temporary order, the educational aspect of Catherine's strategy bore unexpected fruit. A letter arrived from the judge himself, delivered by a passing freight wagon. "Miss Murray, information has reached me regarding your efforts to establish educational opportunities for neighboring families, including conversion of an existing structure to proper schoolroom. Such community benefit represents meaningful improvement to property currently under legal consideration. I shall visit Rawlins Creek again on September 15th. A progress report regarding educational preparations, including expected enrollment and curriculum plans, would be pertinent to ongoing legal determinations. Respectfully, Judge Ezekiel Williams." The letter represented significant encouragement, evidence that Catherine's strategic focus on education as community benefit had indeed captured the judge's interest. It also provided a clear deadline for demonstrating tangible progress. September 15th gives us 3 weeks to complete the schoolroom and formalize enrollment, she told Abernathy, energized by this development. "If neighboring families commit their children officially, it strengthens our position considerably," he nodded thoughtfully. "Mason won't remain idle when he learns of this development, likely to escalate pressure tactics." The prediction proved accurate. The following morning, Catherine discovered their garden had been trampled overnight, vegetables uprooted and fencing broken. No tracks were visible in the hard, packed earth, but the message was clear. vulnerability extended to their food supply, rather than discouraging community involvement. However, the vandalism catalyzed it. When Emily Simmons heard of the destruction, she arrived the next day with Hannah and 3 neighboring women bearing seedlings and vegetable starts from their own gardens. "Replanting takes many hands but little time," Emily explained as the women worked together to restore the damaged garden. "We'll have a proper fence up by sundown with the men's help." By day's end, not only had the garden been restored, but a more substantial fence had been erected around it, and plans established for regular neighborhood patrols of the property. Mason's intimidation tactics had inadvertently strengthened the very community bonds Catherine had sought to cultivate. The schoolroom's completion became a similar community project. Joshua's craftsmanship formed the foundation, but neighbors contributed additional elements: hand-sewn curtains for the windows, a cast-iron stove relocated from an unused cabin, slates and chalk purchased through pooled resources. When Catherine expressed concern about repaying such generosity, Luther Simmons waved away her protests. "Education's payment enough. Most folks here left school early from necessity, not choice. They want better for their children." By early September, 12 children were officially enrolled for the school's opening following harvest completion. Catherine had developed a curriculum adapted to varying ages and abilities, with particular focus on practical literacy and mathematics applicable to farming and ranching operations. The scheduled opening attracted notice beyond immediate neighbors. A reporter from the Fort Worth newspaper arrived unexpectedly, having heard about the Boston schoolmarm establishing frontier education on disputed property. His subsequent article, while somewhat sensationalized, effectively communicated Catherine's educational mission and the community's support for it. Judge Williams would undoubtedly see the piece before his scheduled return to Rawlins Creek. On the ranch management front, financial stability gradually improved as Abernathy's expertise combined with Catherine's careful accounting. They sold several yearling steers at favorable prices, generating capital for targeted improvements. Water management systems were enhanced, fencing reinforced along vulnerable boundaries, and planning begun for rebuilding the main house once legal matters clarified. Practical partnership extended beyond daily operations to longer-term strategic decisions. Each evening, Catherine and Abernathy reviewed progress and planned next steps, their discussions evolving from necessity to genuine intellectual engagement as they considered various aspects of the ranch's development. Crawford never saw potential beyond cattle, Abernathy observed during one such session. Land could support limited cultivation. Fruit trees do well here, as you've seen from the existing orchard. Possible supplementary income during cattle. Market fluctuations. Catherine appreciated such insights, recognizing how Abernathy's deep understanding of the land's capabilities could translate into diversified business operations. In turn, she offered perspectives from her Eastern experience that sometimes suggested novel approaches to familiar challenges. Banking connections in Fort Worth could provide more favorable terms than local options, she noted, applying business principles learned from her father. Larger institutions often offer better rates for established operations with proper financial documentation. Each contributed according to their knowledge and abilities, neither assuming authority over the other's areas of expertise. The balance they established represented true partnership rather than mere cooperation, with decisions emerging from mutual consideration rather than individual direction. This harmony in professional matters gradually influenced personal interactions. As well, formality softened into comfortable familiarity. Mr. Abernathy became simply Samuel during private conversations, while he began occasionally addressing her as Catherine rather than the more distant Miss Murray. Neither acknowledged this subtle shift explicitly, but both recognized its significance. In the structured society of Boston, such informal address between unmarried individuals would have carried unmistakable implications. On the Texas frontier, practical partnerships necessitated different social frameworks, yet traditional understandings remained sufficiently present for both to recognize evolving connection. As Judge Williams's scheduled return approached, Catherine found herself considering possibilities beyond immediate legal battles. If her claim received formal recognition, still uncertain but increasingly plausible given community support and demonstrated improvement, what shape would her future take? The ranch itself had evolved from stranger's property to personal investment, its operation no longer merely strategic leverage, but meaningful purpose. The educational mission had grown from tactical advantage to genuine commitment, and her partnership with Samuel Abernathy had developed dimensions beyond practical necessity. One evening, as September's first cool breezes hinted at eventual autumn, Catherine broached the subject that had increasingly occupied her thoughts. "If Judge Williams rules favorably regarding my claim," she asked, as they completed the day's accounting, "what are your intentions regarding your position here?" Samuel looked up from the ledger, his expression thoughtful. "Depends on the owners. Intentions regarding management." Catherine met his gaze directly. "If that owner wished to continue our current arrangement, equal partnership in operational decisions with appropriate profit-sharing beyond salary, would such terms interest you?" Something shifted in his eyes, recognition of the significance behind her careful phrasing. This was not merely a discussion of employment, but exploration of longer-term association. "Such terms would have considerable appeal," he replied with matching precision, "particularly if the partnership extended to developmental decisions regarding property improvements and business expansion. Complete involvement in all aspects of the enterprise would seem most beneficial to its success," Catherine agreed. Neither had explicitly mentioned personal dimensions beyond professional partnership, yet both understood that possibilities existed beneath the careful language of business arrangements. On the frontier, practical alliances often evolved into more comprehensive connections when mutual respect and compatible purposes aligned. Whether such evolution might occur between them remained unspoken, awaiting resolution of more immediate challenges. Mason's opposition continued unabated. Crawford's brother still maintained inheritance claims, and legal uncertainties persisted despite community support and property improvements. Yet as Catherine retired that evening, she felt genuine optimism regarding possibilities ahead. The burned homestead that had initially represented devastating disappointment had transformed through effort and alliance into something far more meaningful than her original expectations. Whatever Judge Williams' impending decision might bring, the foundations established through partnership and growth had already created something of genuine value, a truth that no legal ruling could entirely diminish. Judge Williams's scheduled return to Rawlins Creek approached with increasing tension. 2 days before his arrival, Catherine received an unexpected visitor, a neatly dressed man in his 40s who introduced himself as Michael Crawford, Nathan's brother and legal heir. "Miss Murray," he greeted her with practiced courtesy as he dismounted before the bunkhouse. "I apologize for arriving unannounced. I've just completed the journey from San Antonio to address this unusual situation." Catherine invited him inside, maintaining composed hospitality despite the potential threat his presence represented to her legal position. Samuel joined them promptly, his expression guarded as introductions were completed. Michael Crawford bore little physical resemblance to the portrait Nathan had sent during their correspondence. Where Nathan's features had suggested rugged determination, Michael possessed the polished appearance and measured speech of a successful attorney. "I've reviewed Judge Williams' temporary order," he began, once seated at the bunkhouse table. "Most irregular, though I understand the humanitarian considerations involved." His assessing gaze took in the simple but well-maintained surroundings. "I've also spoken with Mr. Mason regarding his interest in purchasing this property once inheritance is finalized." "I suspected as much," Catherine replied evenly. "He's been quite determined in expressing that interest." Crawford nodded. "Mason's offer is financially reasonable, though his methods of persuasion apparently lack subtlety." He placed his hat on the table, a gesture suggesting forthcoming candor. "I must be direct, Miss Murray. While I sympathize with your situation, my brother's deception and subsequent criminal activities are inexcusable. The legal realities remain straightforward. As Nathan's sole living relative, inheritance falls to me under territorial law." "Law isn't always simple in application," Samuel noted, his tone neutral but firm. "Judge Williams recognized enough complexity to grant temporary occupation rights pending final determination." Crawford's attention shifted to the foreman. "Based partly on educational services, not yet fully established as I understand it. An admirable community contribution, but unlikely to override established inheritance precedent." Catherine recognized the attorney's professional assessment was probably accurate. Despite her efforts and community support, territorial law strongly favored blood relations in inheritance matters. Yet Crawford's manner suggested negotiation rather than confrontation, an opening she intended to explore. "The school begins operation next month," she informed him. 12 children are currently enrolled, with facilities nearly completed through community effort. The educational void it fills has significant value beyond property considerations. Crawford seemed genuinely interested in this development. "My own children attend excellent schools in San Antonio, a privilege unavailable to many frontier families. I don't dismiss the importance of such initiatives." He leaned forward slightly. "Which brings me to the purpose of my visit. I have a proposition that might satisfy multiple interests." The proposition, when presented, revealed thoughtful consideration of the situation's complexities. Crawford proposed legally transferring 2 acres of the property, including the converted schoolhouse and sufficient surrounding land, to a community educational trust that Catherine would administer. The remainder would transfer to him through inheritance, with subsequent sale to Mason as planned. "You'd retain your educational mission with proper facilities and community support," he explained. "I'd resolve inheritance matters without protracted legal disputes. Mason would acquire the grazing and water rights that primarily interest him. All parties benefit from clean resolution." The offer was unexpectedly generous, providing Catherine legitimate standing to continue her educational work without the ongoing legal battle an outright claim would entail. Yet acceptance would mean surrendering the ranch operations she and Samuel had worked so diligently to maintain and improve. "I appreciate the thoughtfulness of your proposal," she responded. "Carefully. However, our efforts have extended beyond educational services to maintaining the ranch as a viable operation. Mr. Abernathy's expertise combined with community support has preserved its productivity despite challenging circumstances." Crawford's expression registered polite skepticism. "Ranching requires substantial capital and established connections, Miss Murray. Even with Mr. Abernathy's evident competence, sustainable operation demands resources beyond what teaching typically provides." "Our financial position is stronger than appearances might suggest," Catherine countered, a statement Samuel reinforced, with a slight nod. "And operational viability has been documented through careful accounting since my arrival." This information seemed to surprise Crawford, who had apparently assumed financial necessity would make his offer especially attractive. He studied them both with a new assessment before responding. "I see you've developed genuine commitment to the entire operation, not merely the educational component." He collected his hat, rising to indicate the conversation's conclusion. "My offer remains open until Judge Williams's arrival. I hope you'll consider it carefully against the uncertainties of contested legal proceedings." After Crawford's departure, Catherine and Samuel discussed the proposition's implications on the bunkhouse porch, watching sunset paint the horizon in brilliant orange and purple. "It's a generous offer," Samuel acknowledged. 2 acres with an established school building would secure your position in the community regardless of ranch ownership. "But surrender everything else we've built," Catherine replied, her use of "we" deliberate and significant. "The cattle operation, the garden, the orchard, all the improvements and plans we've developed together." She turned to face him directly. "I didn't come west seeking easy resolutions, Samuel. I came seeking possibility on my own terms." His weathered face showed something beyond professional appreciation, a personal investment in their shared enterprise that transcended practical partnership. "Crawford's right about legal precedent favoring blood relations. Judge Williams may acknowledge your contributions without granting property rights." "Then we present the strongest possible case for exception," Catherine decided. "Not just the school, but complete operational improvements, community integration, and viable business management. If we lose, we consider Crawford's fallback offer." The strategy established, they turned attention to final preparations for Judge Williams's arrival. The schoolroom's completion took priority, with Joshua Simmons working extended hours to finish interior furnishings. Catherine prepared comprehensive documentation of improvements, expenses, and business projections, creating a compelling record of stewardship. Community support manifested through practical assistance and formal statements. Luther Simmons drafted a petition signed by neighboring families requesting consideration of educational benefits in property disposition. Emily, now fully recovered, organized a demonstration of student readiness for the judge's visit. The evening before William's scheduled arrival, Catherine reviewed their preparations with Samuel in what had become their customary planning session. The ledgers showed careful accounting. The property improvements were documented with before and after descriptions, and statements of community support were arranged for presentation. "We've built the strongest possible case," Samuel concluded, his confidence genuine despite the legal obstacles they faced. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Catherine said quietly, "I want you to know that these weeks have taught me more about purposeful living than all my years in Boston. This partnership has value beyond property rights." The personal dimension beneath her words hung in the air between them. Samuel's expression softened from professional assessment to something more meaningful. "Some partnerships transcend legal definitions," he replied, the simple statement acknowledging possibilities neither had explicitly addressed. Further conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Jed, his usual stoic expression replaced by urgent concern. "Riders coming from the east," he reported. 6, maybe 7, moving fast with torches. Samuel was immediately alert, interpretation immediate. "Mason, making his move before the judge arrives." He moved toward the gun rack with practiced efficiency. "Catherine, gather the documentation and secure it in the cellar. Jed, get Billy and check the north fence line. They'll likely have men approaching from multiple directions." The calm precision of his response steadied Catherine as she collected their carefully prepared materials. The ranch's storm cellar, dug beneath the old bunkhouse, provided secure storage for documents that represented their legal position. By the time she emerged, Samuel had positioned himself on the porch, rifle in hand, but not raised. Present deterrence rather than immediate threat. Catherine took her place beside him, the revolver he had taught her to use holstered at her hip. The approaching riders materialized from gathering darkness, Mason at their lead with burning torches casting ominous light across the property. They halted 30 yards from the bunkhouse, spreading into a loose semicircle that effectively surrounded the main buildings. "Evening, Miss Murray," Mason called, his tone falsely cordial. "Thought I'd deliver my response to your rejection of my generous offer." He gestured toward the newly completed schoolhouse. "Fine building. Be a shame if an accident befell it before the judge's visit tomorrow." The threat was unmistakable. Destruction of the schoolhouse would eliminate their strongest evidence of meaningful improvement and community benefit, the foundation of their legal position with Judge Williams. Trespassing with the threat of arson carries serious consequences. "Mason," Samuel responded, his voice carrying calm authority, "Judge Williams takes a particular interest in interference with legal proceedings." Mason's expression hardened. "No judge here tonight, Abernathy. Just neighbors resolving property disagreements directly." He signaled to his men, "Burn the schoolhouse. Leave the main building standing as courtesy to the lady." Before his men could act on the order, a new voice entered the confrontation. "That won't be happening, Mason." Luther Simmons stepped from the shadows beside the barn, shotgun in hand. He wasn't alone. Daniel and Joshua Simmons, Robert Henderson, and 4 other neighboring farmers emerged from various positions around the property, all armed and grimly determined. "Communities invested in that schoolhouse," Luther continued, his aged voice steady. "Won't stand by while you destroy children's opportunities for spite and profit." Mason's confidence visibly faltered as he reassessed the situation. What he had planned as intimidation of an isolated woman and a one-armed foreman had become potential armed conflict with multiple opponents. "This doesn't concern you, Simmons," he attempted, authority diminishing in his tone. "Property dispute between legitimate parties." "Educational opportunity concerns every parent in this district," Luther countered. "Judge Williams granted temporary authority to Miss Murray. Your quarrel can wait for his ruling tomorrow, without destruction of community property tonight." The standoff stretched into tense silence, broken eventually by the sound of approaching horses from the direction of town. A lantern bobbed in the darkness, illuminating the unexpected arrival of Michael Crawford, accompanied by a deputy marshal Catherine recognized from Rawlins Creek. "Marshal Taylor," Crawford called as they approached. "Glad we found you before." Violence erupted. He addressed the assembled group with practiced authority. "I received word of potential disturbance at my brother's property and thought legal representation might be prudent. Marshal Taylor kindly agreed to accompany me from town." The marshal, a weathered man with the hard eyes of someone familiar with frontier violence, assessed the situation with professional detachment. "Evening, folks. Seems I'm interrupting something that looks remarkably like preparation for arson on disputed property." His gaze fixed on Mason. "Care to explain the torches, Jacob?" Mason's position had deteriorated from position of strength to legal liability with astonishing speed. "Nighttime ride with adequate lighting," he attempted, stopping to inform Miss Murray of developments before the judge's arrival tomorrow. "Is that so?" The marshal's skepticism was evident. "These neighbors with shotguns are part of your informational visit." The confrontation diffused rapidly with official presence. Mason and his men extinguished their torches and departed under the marshal's watchful eye, their attempt at intimidation thoroughly neutralized by community intervention and unexpected legal witness. As the property quieted, Catherine approached Crawford with genuine curiosity. "How did you know to bring the marshal tonight?" The attorney's expression mixed embarrassment with remnants of professional dignity. "After our conversation, I made inquiries in town about Mason's character and methods. The bartender at the Rawlins Creek Saloon mentioned overhearing plans for tonight's visit while Mason's men were drinking. Professional interest in orderly legal proceedings prompted my response." Crawford's intervention revealed complexity beyond the straightforward inheritance claim he had presented. Whatever his legal position, he apparently possessed ethical boundaries that Mason's methods had exceeded. "Thank you," Catherine said simply. "Your action prevented potential tragedy." "Self-interest, Miss Murray," Crawford replied, though his expression suggested more complex motivation. "Property destruction before legal disposition serves no one's legitimate interests." He glanced toward the schoolhouse, now secured by community members acting as informal guards. "I'll see you at Judge Williams' hearing tomorrow, perhaps with adjusted perspectives on all sides." After Crawford and the marshal departed, the neighbors maintained a vigilant presence throughout the night, rotating watches to ensure no further attempts against the property. Luther Daniel and Joshua Simmons refused to leave, establishing themselves as witnesses to both Mason's attempt and the community's response. Dawn arrived without further incident, bringing the day of Judge Williams' hearing and potential resolution of the property's disputed ownership. Catherine gathered their documentation, now including witness statements regarding Mason's nighttime intimidation attempt. As she prepared for the journey to town, Samuel joined her on the porch, his expression revealing rare uncertainty. "Mason's actions may have strengthened our position with the judge," he observed. "Community response demonstrates meaningful integration beyond legal technicalities." Catherine nodded agreement, but recognized deeper concerns beneath his practical assessment. "You're worried about Crawford's inheritance claim, regardless of Mason's behavior. Blood relation carries legal weight difficult to overcome," he acknowledged. "Crawford seems more reasonable than Mason, but his fundamental position remains unchanged." The acknowledgement of potential defeat after weeks of determined effort hung between them. If Judge Williams ruled solely on legal precedent rather than community benefit and operational improvement, their partnership, at least in its current form, might end today. "Whatever happens in town," Catherine said quietly, "the value we've created extends beyond property ownership. The school will continue in some form. The community connections remain genuine, and our partnership—" She hesitated, venturing beyond purely professional considerations. "Our partnership has meaning that transcends legal determination." Samuel's weathered face softened, the professional mask briefly setting aside to reveal personal investment. "Some partnerships find ways to continue regardless of circumstance," he agreed, the simple statement acknowledging possibilities beyond their current arrangement. The journey to Rawlins Creek took place in thoughtful silence, both considering potential outcomes and adjusted paths forward. The town itself seemed unusually active as they arrived, with numerous horses and wagons indicating significant attendance at the scheduled hearing. Simmons Mercantile, site of Judge Williams' temporary court, overflowed with interested parties. Mason and several associates occupied one side of the room, while Crawford sat alone at a small table, reviewing documents with professional focus. Most surprising was the presence of numerous neighboring families, including the Simmons, Hendersons, and others who had supported the school's development. Judge Williams entered punctually, his bearing formal as he established the day's proceedings. "This hearing addresses disputed claims regarding the Crawford Ranch property," he began. "Inheritance claim from Michael Crawford as blood relation, purchase interest from Jacob Mason pending inheritance resolution, and occupancy claim from Catherine Murray based on prior relationship with the deceased owner and subsequent property improvements." The judge's methodical approach allowed each party to present their position without interruption. Crawford outlined his inheritance rights as Nathan's brother, acknowledging Catherine's contributions while maintaining the legal precedence of family connection. Mason presented his purchase interest, attempting to characterize the previous night's events as simple miscommunication rather than intimidation. When Catherine's turn came, she provided comprehensive documentation of improvements, educational initiatives, operational management, and community integration. The witness statements regarding Mason's attempted intimidation were included alongside operational ledgers and school enrollment records. The property has transitioned from an abandoned criminal's holding to a functioning community asset, she concluded, not through abstract legal claim, but through direct investment of labor, resources, and genuine commitment to area development. Judge Williams reviewed the materials with judicial thoroughness, asking occasional clarifying questions of all parties. His particular interest in the educational component remained evident, with specific inquiries about curriculum, enrollment, and sustainable operation. As witness testimony began, the community's position became increasingly clear. Luther Simmons, Robert Henderson, and other neighboring landowners described the educational void the school addressed and the collaborative improvement efforts undertaken. Daniel and Joshua provided first-hand accounts of Mason's intimidation attempt and Crawford's unexpected intervention. Most compelling was Emily Simmons' testimony regarding the medication Catherine had provided during her illness. "She saved my life with medicine she'd brought from Boston," Emily stated simply. "Then established education for our children when no one else would. That's the kind of neighbor this community needs." Throughout the testimony, Catherine observed Michael Crawford's reactions with interest. The attorney's expression reflected increasing thoughtfulness as community members detailed the tangible benefits of Catherine's presence beyond property management. When all testimony concluded, Judge Williams called for final statements from primary claimants. Crawford rose first, his professional demeanor intact, but his position noticeably adjusted. "Your Honor, legal precedent clearly supports inheritance rights through blood relation. This remains incontestable in territorial law." He paused, glancing toward Catherine before continuing. "However, Miss Murray's contributions to both property improvement and community benefit merit recognition beyond dismissal of occupancy claims. I therefore propose a modified resolution. The modification, when outlined, surprised all present. Crawford proposed division of the property, the ranch house site, and adjacent 200 acres, including the school property, would transfer to Catherine in recognition of improvements and community contribution. The remaining 1,000 acres would pass to Crawford through inheritance, with water rights shared through formal agreement. This resolution acknowledges both legal precedent and equitable consideration," Crawford concluded. "It provides sustainable educational operation while preserving fundamental inheritance principles." Judge Williams turned to Catherine. "Miss Murray, your response to this proposed resolution?" The offer represented significant victory despite partial concession. Sustainable property ownership, including the school site, and sufficient acreage for modest ranch operations. Yet it also meant surrendering the larger vision she and Samuel had developed together. Before responding, Catherine glanced toward Samuel, seeking his assessment of practical viability. His slight nod communicated professional judgment that 200 acres could support limited operations with careful management. "The proposal has merit, Your Honor," she acknowledged, "though I would request specific inclusion of the existing orchard within the allocated acreage and formal easement for cattle movement to the creek." Crawford nodded agreement to these modifications. Mason, recognizing his purchase opportunity had dramatically diminished, attempted objection, but found little judicial sympathy after testimony regarding his intimidation tactics. Judge Williams considered the proposed resolution with judicial deliberation before delivering his ruling. Blood relation establishes fundamental inheritance right, but extraordinary circumstances merit equitable consideration. The proposed division with Miss Murray's requested modifications provides reasonable balance between legal precedent and demonstrated community benefit. His formal order established implementation timeline, boundary survey requirements, and specific terms of water rights sharing. Most importantly, it granted Catherine immediate clear title to the specified acreage, including the school property and ranch house site. As the hearing concluded, Catherine experienced complex emotions: victory in securing legitimate ownership, disappointment in surrendering the broader operation they had worked to maintain, and uncertainty regarding partnership continuation under reduced circumstances. Crawford approached as the crowd dispersed, his professional manner now tempered. With genuine respect, reasonable resolution, Miss Murray. Your improvements and community contributions merited recognition beyond what strict legal precedent might dictate. Thank you for your flexibility, Catherine replied sincerely. The modified solution serves multiple legitimate interests. Indeed. Crawford hesitated, seemingly weighing additional comments. My brother's methods were deplorable, but his judgment in corresponding with a woman of your character was perhaps better than his other decisions. With a respectful nod, he departed to finalize arrangements with the judge regarding property division. Outside the mercantile, community members offered congratulations and expressed satisfaction with educational continuity. The 200 acres would support the school and provide Catherine legitimate standing independent of charity or temporary accommodation. The critical question, how this modified resolution would affect her partnership with Samuel, remained unaddressed amid public proceedings. That conversation awaited their private journey back to a property now legally divided between new ownership designations. As they prepared for departure, Catherine noticed Samuel speaking with Crawford near the mercantile entrance, their conversation appearing cordial despite representing potentially competing interests. Whatever their discussion entailed, it concluded with a handshake suggesting mutual understanding rather than animosity. The resolution had established new boundaries requiring adaptation of plans and possibilities. Yet as Catherine observed Samuel's approach, his expression conveyed not disappointment but thoughtful consideration of adjusted opportunities, the same practical resilience that had characterized their partnership from its beginning. The journey back from Rawlins Creek carried a weight of unspoken questions. Catherine's newly established ownership of 200 acres represented significant victory, yet also necessitated revision of plans developed for the full property. How this modified circumstance would affect her partnership with Samuel remained the most pressing uncertainty. They traveled in thoughtful silence until reaching the halfway point, where a small creek offered a natural resting place for the horses. As they paused, Samuel finally addressed the question that hung between them. 200 acres with the house site and orchard can support modest operations, he observed, professional assessment providing foundation for personal considerations. Not the full cattle program we'd planned, but sustainable with careful management. Catherine studied his expression, searching for disappointment or resentment in his weathered features. Finding neither, she ventured further. Would such reduced circumstances still interest you as an operational partner? Samuel's response came with deliberate care. Depends on the terms being offered. Equal partnership in all aspects, Catherine replied without hesitation. Operational decisions, profit distribution, developmental planning. She paused, gathering courage for the more personal dimension. And perhaps consideration of arrangements beyond business association, if such possibility holds interest. The careful phrasing maintained dignity while acknowledging developing personal connection beneath their professional collaboration. Samuel's expression softened, the reserve he typically maintained yielding to genuine warmth. Such comprehensive partnership would indeed hold considerable interest, he confirmed, matching her deliberate language before allowing a rare smile. Crawford and I discussed potential arrangements while you were speaking with the neighbors. This unexpected information startled Catherine. What sort of arrangements? Operational division that maintains integrated function despite separate ownership, Samuel explained. Crawford has no interest in direct ranch management, but recognizes value in experienced oversight. He's offered a management contract for his portion with living quarters and profit percentage. The implications crystallized immediately. Samuel could maintain operational involvement with the full property while basing his primary association with Catherine's legally established portion. The arrangement would preserve most elements of their planned collaboration despite divided ownership. That's remarkably amenable, Catherine observed, genuine appreciation mixing with lingering wariness. Did he explain his motivation for such generous terms? Samuel nodded. Professional respect for demonstrated competence, according to his statement. Though I suspect his legal practice in San Antonio holds greater interest than remote ranch management. This arrangement provides income without direct involvement. Whatever Crawford's motivations, the proposed solution offered a practical pathway forward that maintained most aspects of their developed partnership. The relief Catherine felt manifested in visible relaxation of tension she hadn't fully acknowledged carrying. Then our partnership continues, with adjusted parameters, she concluded with quiet satisfaction. Both business and personal considerations remain open for further development. Samuel's response was characteristically straightforward. I believe formal discussion of personal considerations might best occur after property boundaries are officially established. His tone softened the practical statement. Important foundations deserve proper timing and circumstance. The simple acknowledgement of future intentions provided sufficient clarity while respecting appropriate progression. Catherine appreciated both the confirmation of interest and the respectful patience it demonstrated, qualities that had characterized their evolving relationship from the beginning. Upon returning to the property, they found Luther and Joshua Simmons already consulting maps and discussing preliminary boundary markers for the divided property. The community's continued practical support emphasized the broader foundation their efforts had established, beyond legal ownership. Judge's ruling seems fair-minded, Luther commented as they joined the improvised surveying discussion. 200 acres with the house site gives you a solid establishment, while Crawford's portion maintains sufficient grazing without disrupting water access. The elderly farmer's practical assessment confirmed Samuel's earlier evaluation. The following weeks brought methodical implementation of Judge Williams's ruling. Official surveyors established precise boundaries, water rights were formally documented through shared access agreements, and Crawford's management contract with Samuel was finalized with equitable terms benefiting all parties. Mason's opposition receded following his public exposure during the property hearing. While the influential rancher maintained distant animosity, the community's demonstrated solidarity had effectively neutralized his more aggressive tactics. The property division had also rendered his water access ambitions partially fulfilled through potential cooperation with Crawford rather than confrontation with Catherine. With legal matters resolved, attention turned to rebuilding the main house. Before winter arrived, the original foundation and stone chimney remained sound, providing a structural starting point for efficient reconstruction. Joshua Simmons developed comprehensive building plans incorporating practical improvements while maintaining the original footprint. Proper kitchen with larger windows here, he explained, showing Catherine the detailed drawings. Covered porch wrapping these two sides for summer shade. 4 rooms instead of the original 3, with possibility for future expansion as needs. Develop, the reference to potential expanding requirements, carried delicate acknowledgement of developing personal circumstances without presumption. Catherine appreciated both the practical planning and the respectful awareness it reflected. Community participation in rebuilding efforts emerged organically, with neighboring families contributing labor alongside materials. Daniel Simmons organized rotating work crews that made steady progress while allowing participants to maintain their own necessary farm and ranch operations. Barn-raising tradition applied to house building, Luther explained, when Catherine expressed gratitude for such extensive assistance. Community takes care of its own. You've brought education and medical knowledge. This is simple exchange of valuable contributions. The schoolhouse officially opened in mid-October, with 12 students ranging from 6 to 14 years of age. Catherine established a practical curriculum addressing fundamental literacy and mathematics while incorporating agricultural applications relevant to frontier life. Morning sessions focused on essential academics, while afternoons integrated practical skills appropriate to various ages and abilities. Emily Simmons volunteered as assistant teacher 3 days weekly, her own educational background limited, but her enthusiasm and connection with children proving valuable assets. The arrangement provided necessary support while allowing Catherine to maintain involvement with property development alongside educational responsibilities. Crawford visited once during this period, arriving with formal property documents requiring signatures and bringing unexpected housewarming gifts, a modest library of books for both the school and Catherine's personal use. San Antonio offers certain advantages of civilization that should be shared when possible, he explained, his formal manner softened by genuine appreciation for the property's transformation. Education requires proper resources beyond dedicated instruction. His brief inspection of developing operations appeared to confirm satisfaction with the management arrangement. Before departing, he mentioned casual conversation with former business associates regarding potential wool contracts that might benefit the region's sheep farmers. Information that suggested ongoing connection rather than absentee ownership. By early November, the main house neared completion, its sturdy frame and fresh lumber standing as a physical manifestation of renewal and forward progress. The interior remained partially unfinished, but sufficient completion had been achieved to provide comfortable habitation before winter's arrival. Throughout this period, Catherine and Samuel maintained their established partnership routines, while allowing personal dimensions to develop at appropriate pace. Their evening planning sessions continued with focus on operational decisions, yet increasingly included broader conversations about backgrounds, values, and longer-term aspirations. Catherine shared stories of her Boston upbringing and teaching experiences, while Samuel gradually revealed aspects of his pre-war life in Tennessee and the circumstances of his military service. The slow building of personal knowledge alongside professional collaboration created the foundation of genuine understanding beyond practical compatibility. On a crisp November evening, with the first hint of winter in the air, they stood together, examining the nearly completed house as sunset painted the horizon in brilliant oranges and purples. The moment carried natural significance, physical manifestation of transformation from burned ruin to promising new beginning. Hard to reconcile this with what greeted me upon arrival, Catherine observed, remembering the charred skeleton that had represented devastating disappointment just months earlier. Seems almost providential in retrospect, the circumstances that appeared most disastrous creating opportunity for something far better than original expectations. Samuel's expression reflected a similar assessment. Nathan's deception brought You to a burned homestead instead of a functioning ranch with a criminal husband. He glanced at her with rare openness. Difficult to regret the outcome, despite the challenging process. The simple statement acknowledged developing personal connection with characteristic understatement. Catherine appreciated both the sentiment and the restrained expression that matched her own sense of appropriate progression. The house will be fully habitable next week, according to Joshua's estimate, she noted. Practical consideration providing a bridge to more personal matters. My continued residence in the bunkhouse will become unnecessary. Samuel recognized the implicit question regarding evolving arrangements. Appropriate timing for discussing formal understandings regarding partnership beyond operational matters. He suggested, if such discussions remain of interest. They do, Catherine confirmed with simple directness. Very much so. 3 days later, with the main house sufficiently completed for occupancy, Samuel accompanied Catherine on inspection of the finished elements. The central room with its stone fireplace provided warm gathering space, while the kitchen's practical design reflected careful consideration of daily function. Bedrooms remained partially furnished, but entirely habitable. As they completed the tour, Samuel's typically composed expression showed unusual indication of carefully contained emotion. Catherine, he began with uncharacteristic hesitation, our partnership has developed meaningful dimensions beyond initial practical arrangement. It has, she agreed, allowing him space to continue at his own pace. I'm not a man given to elaborate expressions, he acknowledged with rueful self-awareness. But clarity seems appropriate regarding intentions and hopes. He met her gaze directly. I've developed deeper attachment than business partnership typically warrants, and find myself considering more permanent arrangements if such possibility holds mutual appeal. The carefully constructed statement, formal yet heartfelt, perfectly reflected the man himself. Substantive, direct, and genuine beneath reserved presentation. Catherine felt warmth spread through her at both the sentiment and the characteristic manner of its expression. Such possibility holds very definite appeal, she replied with matching sincerity. Our partnership has become essential to my understanding of purpose and belonging. Formalizing personal dimensions would seem a natural progression of what has already developed between us. Relief and happiness transformed Samuel's weathered features, the typically reserved expression yielding to genuine warmth. Then I'm officially asking for your hand in marriage, Catherine Murray. Partnership in all aspects, personal and practical alike. And I'm officially accepting Samuel Abernathy, with great happiness and absolute certainty. The simplicity of their exchange suited both their personalities and the solid foundation from which it emerged. No elaborate declarations were necessary between people whose actions had consistently demonstrated commitment and whose partnership had been tested through genuine challenges. Their engagement became public knowledge the following Sunday when they attended church services in Rawlins Creek together. Community response reflected universal approval and distinct lack of surprise. Luther Simmons particularly seemed satisfied with the development, his weathered face creasing in knowing smile. Figured that partnership was heading toward proper arrangement from early days, he commented after the service. Good match of complementary strengths, community benefits from such solid establishment. Wedding plans developed with practical efficiency that characterized their overall approach. The ceremony would take place in early December, allowing completion of pressing seasonal work while ensuring formalization before the year's end. Judge Williams would return to Rawlins Creek for his regular circuit, providing official capacity alongside Reverend Harper's spiritual authority. As preparations advanced, Catherine wrote to her former headmistress in Boston, sharing the remarkable journey from mail-order bride arrangement to independent property owner and soon-to-be wife of a partner, chosen through genuine knowledge rather than desperate correspondence. What began as an apparent disaster, arriving to find my intended groom imprisoned and his homestead burned, transformed through unexpected pathways into circumstances far superior to my original expectations. The partnership Samuel and I have developed rests on mutual respect, complementary abilities, and genuine appreciation rather than desperate necessity on either side. I cannot help reflecting that Nathan Crawford's deception ultimately led to authentic connection that might never have emerged through conventional paths. The very challenges that initially appeared overwhelming became the foundation for demonstrating character and compatibility beyond superficial considerations. The response, arriving 2 weeks later, carried congratulations alongside thoughtful observation. Providence often works through seeming misfortune, dearest Catherine. Your resilience transformed potential tragedy into triumph of both practical circumstance and personal fulfillment. The education you provide extends beyond the formal schoolroom to embodiment, determination, and adaptability. Lessons your frontier students will carry throughout their lives. As their December wedding approached, the transformation of both property and personal circumstances stood as testament to possibilities that emerge from adversity when met with determination and principled action. The burned homestead that had initially represented devastating disappointment had become the foundation for genuine community contribution and personal fulfillment beyond Catherine's original limited hopes. The school flourished with growing enrollment as word spread throughout the region. The reconstructed house stood complete, its solid construction promising generations of useful service. The newly established property boundaries, rather than limiting operations, had created opportunity for innovative collaboration across ownership lines. Most significantly, the partnership that had begun through practical necessity had evolved into a life-altering connection based on demonstrated character, compatible values, and mutual respect, elements entirely absent from Catherine's original mail-order arrangement with Nathan Crawford. On their wedding morning, Catherine stood at the bedroom window watching sunrise illuminate the frost-covered landscape with golden light. From this vantage point, she could see both the schoolhouse where her educational mission had established community foundation and the orchards that promised future harvests far beyond immediate seasons. Samuel joined her without speaking, his presence beside her communicating shared appreciation for the moment's significance. Together, they observed dawn breaking over the property they had reclaimed from deception and disorder, transforming it through partnership into the foundation for a meaningful future. Not the arrival I anticipated when leaving Boston, Catherine observed softly, but an infinitely better outcome than original expectations. Life's curious that way, Samuel replied, his expression showing rare, unguarded emotion. What seems darkest often precedes most significant light. The observation captured the essential truth of their shared journey. Apparent disaster transformed through character and commitment into genuine opportunity. Deception unwittingly creating a pathway to authenticity. Burned ruins providing foundation for meaningful construction. Their wedding later that day united not only two individuals, but the community that had developed around their efforts. Judge Williams presided with judicial dignity complemented by genuine personal approval, while Reverend Harper provided a spiritual dimension with thoughtful observations about partnerships built on mutual support and shared purpose. Marriages founded on demonstrated commitment through adversity possess particular strength, the Reverend noted during the ceremony. These two have already faced challenges together that many unions never encounter, discovering compatibility through practical demonstration rather than mere sentiment. The celebration afterward reflected the community bonds their partnership had helped foster. The schoolhouse, temporarily transformed into reception space, hosted neighbors from throughout the region. Luther and Emily Simmons, the Hendersons, and families whose children now received previously unavailable education, gathered to commemorate not only personal union, but collective achievement their combined efforts represented. As evening arrived, guests gradually departed with expressions of goodwill and practical gifts suited to frontier life. Catherine and Samuel found themselves alone at last in their newly completed home, the culmination of journey neither could have envisioned months earlier. From mail-order arrangement to burned homestead to this, Catherine reflected as they stood together beside the fireplace. A rather remarkable transformation. "Transformation continues," Samuel responded, his typical reserve softened by the day's significance. "What we've built provides foundation rather than completion." The simple observation captured the essential truth of their partnership. Not static achievement, but ongoing process of building, adapting, and growing together through whatever circumstances emerged. The mail-order bride's wagon had indeed reached a burned homestead rather than promised destination, but the apparent disaster had ultimately delivered her to far better circumstances than original limited expectations. As the fire cast warm light across their home's main room, Catherine recognized the profound truth that sometimes life's most significant blessings arrive disguised as devastating disappointments. The journey from Boston teacher to mail-order bride to independent property owner and community educator had required courage, resilience, and openness to unexpected possibilities. The partnership she had found with Samuel represented a genuine connection that transcended her original modest hopes, built on demonstrated character rather than desperate correspondence, strengthened through shared challenges rather than superficial compatibility, and promising a future of purpose beyond mere survival. Their transformation from strangers united by circumstance to partners joined by choice represented the most meaningful outcome of her journey west. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together with the same determination and practical wisdom that had already transformed a burned homestead into a foundation for a flourishing future. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.